Hello and welcome to the Comic Cave. I'm Ramsey, aka Captain Away, and today we're looking at the 2008 story arc, Spider-Man: New Ways to Die. As I've discussed in previous videos, Brand New Day saw a complete reset to Spider-Man's universe that tried to return him to acting more like he did in his teenage years. Broke up his marriage with Mary Jane Watson, with it now never having happened in the first place, set him up with a new group of friends, and faced him off against new groups of enemies. The first arc following the Brand New Day branding then set Peter against a modern remixed version of a classic foe, Kraven the Hunter, with Kraven's daughter Anna desiring to pick up where Kraven left off. That was the last story arc I covered so far on this channel, so be sure to watch my two videos if you want to be fully caught up on what's going on. But those stories still left some questions about the status of some other Spider-Man villains of the past. Some we mostly knew because they were appearing in other series, like Norman Osborn, the original Green Goblin, who had become the head of the reformed criminal supergroup, the Thunderbolts, following the Civil War event. They're kinda like Marvel's version of the Suicide Squad, if you're not familiar. Others, like original Venom Eddie Brock, had their current status left as largely a mystery without them appearing in a Spider-Man book for some time. Last we saw of Eddie, he was dying of a cancer that came from his exposure to the Venom symbiote, and so he had attempted to rid himself of that symbiote. And yes, I did pick those two examples for a reason, because they are both going to be the focus of this Spider story arc, which will be the first 6-issue or 2-month-long story arc from the Brand New Day era, with future head Spidey guy Dan Slott typing the script and famous Spidey artist John Romita Jr. returning to the series for the art. So let's find out what this dynamic duo has in store for the old webhead and take this away. The comic opens on a brief history of Spider-Man, but you guys don't need that because you've been watching my videos, right? Besides, it's a pretty useless review anyway, since it pretty much skips everything in between Amazing Fantasy 15 and the start of Brand New Day. So basically anything you might be likely to not know if you're reading this comic isn't covered here. How helpful. The main things it tells us is that Peter's looking for a job after having quit the DB, and he's recently run into a bunch of new villains Marvel is hoping you'll like, but you probably won't. Like Menace, another knockoff Goblin. But hey, they have monogrammed bombs now, so that's nice. Spidey's too busy being a wise ass to realize that they're bombs though, so they explode on him, allowing Menace to get away. Out of the ruins of the building run a bunch of people, and from the way that they're running, it's clear to Peter that they're more interested in hiding from the surely soon to be arriving cops than they are in actually escaping the rubble. And that convinces Peter that the building was hiding a sweatshop. He snaps some pictures then, even though he can't really sell them since he's been blacklisted from every paper in town after getting on Dexter Bennett's shit list. But his best pal Harry gives him the idea to go to one of Bennett's enemies, who won't mind pissing off DB. And like, what? You mean you're telling me he hadn't already done that? Really? Pete, dude, WTF. That brings Pete to Frontline, the newspaper started by ex-Bugle reporter Ben Urich during Civil War. Frontline is quickly becoming the new Daily Bugle as new management at the now renamed DB is pushing all the employees to seek new employment, unlike any other companies we know of right now. And it just so happens that one of their reporters has a scoop on that same building, revealing the fact that it's owned by mayoral candidate Randall Crown. And if you haven't been able to tell already that Crown is the worst of the two options for mayor in this race, well, this comic is about to let you know. Because Crown, angry at the bad press from Frontline, invites Norman Osborn and his Thunderbolts into the city to deal with Spider-Man. Spider-Man, if you remember, is at this point still suspected of being a serial killer by the NYPD, due to them finding spider tracers in the mouths of several murder victims, as we saw during my Brand New Day video. It hasn't been a major plot point yet, but they do keep reminding us in the dialogue in the background. And since superheroes had to get registered following Civil War, and Spidey is not registered, having the registered villains of the Thunderbolts hunt Spidey down isn't too weird. Especially with Norman Osborn having recently managed to repair his damaged reputation by being the hero of Secret Invasion. And just in case, Crown even gives him a boost in that department by making him his company's Man of the Year. which I guess is a big deal somehow. Yay. Rich dudes celebrating rich dudes. There's something you never see. The T-Bolts currently consist of Songbird, who not surprisingly has sound-based powers, Chin Lu, the original radioactive man, and Mac Gargan, who first appeared as the supervillain Scorpion, but now has taken on the Venom symbiote to be the new Venom, after Eddie got rid of it because he got sick with cancer. There's also Bullseye, but Osborn considers him to be too much of a psychopath to let him loose on the general population and keeps him locked up. And man, you must be a psychopath if the Green Goblin thinks you're a psychopath. As a team, they decide to pay a visit to Peter Parker, who nearly blows his secret identity when some federal agents attempt to force him back into his new apartment he shares with NYPD cop Vin Gonzalez. Here we learn a few shocking things about how erasing everyone's memories of Peter's identity worked in this new timeline. While most everyone knows by now that Norman Osborn discovered Peter's true identity, which is why you would probably expect him to come here, he's actually just interrogating Peter because he assumes Pete has some deal with Spider-Man, some way of contacting the wall crawler in order to take his pictures all the time. So Norman no longer knows Peter's secret identity, and more surprisingly, neither does Venom, despite the symbiote still having memories of being joined with Spider-Man. Also surprisingly, we learn here that Peter does know that everyone's memory was erased, which means he must have at least some of the memories of the before times, even if he also seems to have all of the memories he needs of these times. Yeah, that particular mystery will continue to unfold as I cover more of this series. For now, Osborn and the Bolts decide they're not getting anything out of Pete, so they head out into the city to patrol for Spider-Man instead. But Spidey decides to bring the hunt to them. He attacks Osborn at his headquarters, wanting him to know that he's not interested in the Goblin's usual head games, thinking this time their confrontation will be different since Norman no longer knows Pete's secret identity. Osborn calls in the Thunderbolts to base, hoping to bring them back to take care of Spider-Man, but Venom has no interest in returning, believing he's found his prey at the Feast Center. That's a little on the nose for Venom to go to Feast, as even he points out, but I'll allow it. You might not remember Feast, as I barely mentioned it in my brand new day review. Its rather unfortunate name stands for Food Emergency Aid, Shelter, and Training. So far, we've primarily seen it as the place where Aunt May works. But it's a homeless shelter run by philanthropist Martin Lee to provide, as its name suggests, a place for the unhoused to stay, get minor medical treatment, some food, and job training to get people back on their feet. After Frontline ran that story about Randall Crown, Dexter Bennett at the DB tried to get back at them by sending Betty Brant to attempt to dig up dirt on Martin Lee, as Lee is supported by Bill Hollister, and the other way around, Crown's primary opponent in the mayoral race. The focus for Betty's story is the supposed miracle cures that have been happening at the center, and the latest one seems to revolve around Eddie Brock. As I mentioned in the intro, Eddie has been dying of cancer, a cancer he got due to having been paired with the Venom symbiote for so long. So now Eddie is freed from the negative influence of the symbiote, and freed from having to be held accountable for the crimes he committed as Venom thanks to Matt Murdock, who must have used an argument similar to the one he used in a very similar story we saw back in my Vengeance of Venom review. But Eddie still holds himself accountable, and believing he'll be dead soon, desires to save his soul by doing some good work. So he begins volunteering at the Feast Center as well. Lee explains all of this to Betty, but we see that's not quite all he's doing. Somehow, whether intentional or not, he's releasing tiny little white cells into Eddie's bloodstream that seem to be mixing with small remnants of the Venom symbiote. Almost immediately after this, Eddie's doctors declare him to be cancer-free, and Eddie returns to Feast in tears, beyond himself with relief, as he feels that with the cancer gone, so too, finally, is the influence of the symbiote. So, wouldn't you know it, that's when Mac Gargan crashes the party, thinking that he's found Spidey, but instead of course he found Brock. Gargan wants to hurt Eddie, but to his surprise, the symbiote seems to want to reunite with its former host. But that seems to spark something in Eddie, and he's suddenly covered in something bubbling and white that actually hurts Gargan to touch. And after a moment, Eddie's able to knock Gargan away and reveals himself with a new look and a new name: Anti-Venom. Okay, it's probably supposed to be pronounced anti-venom, because that's a real word. But that's an unhyphenated word, and this one is hyphenated. Also, anti-venom is a serum used to fight toxic substances, and anti-venom is a guy who is, opposed to venom. So I feel like the different pronunciation makes them different things. Am I making a big deal out of something completely unimportant? Yes, I am. Am I gonna stop pronouncing it anti-venom? No, I'm not. A V and regular V then start your typical supervillain brawl through the Feast Center. Spidey attempts to interrupt, but both Venoms turn against him, telling him to butt out. That is, until Spidey saves a civilian that was almost crushed by a car Eddie threw, and Eddie, with enough mental clarity to finally realize that Spider-Man also protects the innocents, then teams up with Spidey to stop Gargan. With that giving them enough of an advantage, Eddie is able to start quote-unquote curing Gargan of the symbiote. But he gets distracted by Spider-Man when he realizes that Spider-Man's radioactive blood is an impurity, and he starts attempting to cure Spidey instead. Thankfully, Spidey is somewhat ironically rescued by the Thunderbolts, even if they're rescuing him just to take him into custody. Hey, take what you can get. But they're stymied by anti-venom, who now wants to cure Chin of his radiation. Eddie, got no focus, man. This is why you always lost to Spider-Man. Songbird and Radioactive Man use sound and heat to take out this new symbiote, only to discover that anti-venom does not have those weaknesses. Still reeling from Eddie's power drain, and realizing that getting too close to anti-venom causes his powers to short out, Peter nopes on out of there. And not sure how to handle Eddie and his new powers, Osborn and the Thunderbolts quickly do the same. But despite this apparent failure, Osborn is invigorated by this encounter, partly because he found Spider-Man's camera, which Pete had set up during the fight with the Venoms, once he had managed to get the fight to move outside and away from his aunt inside the shelter. Using the camera, Osborn realizes three things. 1, that Spidey has been taking his own pictures all these years. 2, that Spidey's powers cut out when he's near anti-venom. And 3, that Spidey has programmed the camera to follow the spider logo on his chest, allowing him to always be in the center of the frame. Pete did this in an earlier story during Brand New Day and was super impressed with himself at the time. Well, now it's gonna bite him in the butt. Osborn also manages to draw some of the anti-venom out of Gargan, and takes it to have the quote lab boys work on finding a counter to it. And as he says, by lab boys he means boy, and by boy he means freak. Freak was that supervillain we saw during B&D that would come back to life every time he died and have a new resistance to whatever it was that killed him that time before. We last saw him being secretly carted away by Oscorp, and now we learn that Osborn has been using Freak's unique physique to find cures for all kinds of diseases. And now he instead pumps him full of the anti-venom so that his body produces some kind of counter to that. And it does. I mean, it produces something. What that something exactly is, I don't know. But it's supposedly highly dangerous. The actual scientists in the lab don't too much like that Osborn is now apparently creating weapons. But Osborn says that's life. After all, for every life you save, there's a million new ways to die. Hey, that's the Thing! He said the Thing! That's the name of the comic! Aren't you excited? So Norman prepares for war, heading into his office in Oscorp and using the most obvious book, Rise of the Norman Empire, as a secret switch to open the way to his Goblin gear. Only someone's been at that gear, according to Norman at least, and he's going to spend much of the rest of the series insinuating that it was Harry who got into the closet. We saw Peter assume pretty much the exact same thing after Menace's first appearance. I think Marvel really thought the mystery of who Menace is would be a really big deal for readers. It's not, though. It's just so not. And the reveal when it does come is so meh. But that's for another video. Norman met Menace earlier during the Venoms fight. Menace had attacked Bill Hollister in his office, leaving him so injured that he ended up in the hospital. And then from there, gone on to attack Norman. Norman immediately assumed Menace was Harry, asking him, "Whose little boy are you?" During their brief scuffle, Norman had criticized Menace for using all the power of a goblin to just play in local politics, since everything Menace has done has been focused around Crown and Hollister's campaigns. and during their first appearance was at least partly responsible for the death of Hollister's predecessor, Bisa Parfrey. Menace, on the other hand, was remarkably furious at how Norman has squandered the Osborn name, fortune, and power for petty revenge against Spider-Man. Of course, this whole I only want Spider-Man thing may have just been a taunt, as Osborn was already suspecting Harry to be Menace. And we do learn later that Norman's aware of his son's issues with how his dad was always too busy trying to fight Spider-Man to have time for his son. But perhaps inspired by Menace, Osborn dresses up again as the Goblin, and then gives Gargan an injection of the anti-venom serum that Freak created, and also special Scorpion-themed venom armor to protect his recuperating symbiote. Meanwhile, Osborn's men, equipped with bullets that can track the same frequency Spidey uses for his camera, go with Bullseye to attack Spider-Man, finding him at the coffee bean while Pete's there with Harry and Harry's girlfriend, Lily Hollister. Due to the tracking, the Goon Squad are able to actually land a few shots on Spidey, but unfortunately for them, anti-venom had been hiding among their numbers, using the symbiote's ability to take other forms to hide himself as one of Osborn's men. He spoils their fun and reveals the tracking function to Spidey, who then turns that function against them by attaching his tracker to Bullseye, who then gets shot down by his own teammates as Spidey says, "Bullseye." I want to make fun of that line so bad, but I have to admit, he kinda got me with that one. I don't know how I didn't see that coming. Fair play, Dan Slott. Fair play. Harry Osborn, meanwhile, goes to face his father, assuming the attack on the coffee bean was actually about him. And I think Harry's exasperation with Norman returning to his goblin self is my favorite part of the whole story. I love the bit earlier when Norman had called him to tell him to stop stealing his goblin stuff, because he was assuming again that Harry was Menace, and Harry was just like, "Oh lord, you're wearing the mask again, aren't you?" Of course, Norman going into the confrontation with a mug saying "World's Greatest Dad," despite quite obvious evidence to the contrary, is also a pretty ballsy move, so well played to him, I guess. Spidey and Anti-Venom show up to Oscorp to put a stop to Norman's schemes, but Pete still doesn't trust Eddie, and his powers are still weakened when he gets too close to Anti-Venom, so they go their separate ways. Eddie quickly runs across the Thunderbolts, where he webs Chin and Songbird to a wall, and then gets in a fight with the fully scorpionized regular Venom. But Gargan's new stinger contains whatever that was that Freak created using the anti-venom symbiote. And when he stings Eddie with it, it seems to be enough to kill that symbiote and return Eddie back to his normal human self. However, Gargan can't get the Venom suit to obey him and finish Eddie off. The symbiote still has too much of an allegiance to its old host, and Gargan is forced to leave Eddie alone. Spider-Man, in the meantime, goes to face down the Green Goblin, and knowing that Norman can't actually die, goes a little further than normal, taking control of Norman's Goblin glider and crashing him headfirst through wall after wall of the building, until they accidentally uncover a lab filled wall-to-wall with trapped human test subjects. It's not directly stated, but I think the implication is that Oscorp was testing its new Freak-produced cures on human beings, most of these people being probably illegal aliens and homeless, just like the group Peter saw escaping from that Randall Crown-owned building at the beginning of the story, the idea being that those people too were being tested on. Norman sets off a self-destruct for the building, knowing Spidey won't risk finishing him off while human lives are in danger. And he's right. Spidey and Harry free the victims and try to lead them out of the building. Spidey also frees Songbird and Chin Lu to have them help out with this. Yeah, come on, Radioactive Man, up and at them! For Spidey's heroism, Songbird decides to lie to Osborn and say that Spidey was crushed in the collapse of the building. And though Pete doesn't agree to quitting his long johns, he does agree to at least lie low for a couple of days. So Osborn declares their work in New York done, blames Spidey for the destruction of Oscorp, and then finally leaves the city. Harry, Lily, and Pete search Norman's office for a file Harry says will clear his name, though his pals aren't sure what it needs to be cleared from. While Harry leaves the room, Pete notices that The Rise of the Norman Empire remains the only book standing in the destroyed office. But before he can grab it, Lily pulls his attention away, coming onto him and even kissing him. There has been some build up to this, and even Harry isn't oblivious to that fact, having yelled at Lily earlier about it, but I still feel like there's just no chemistry here. But then again, maybe there's not supposed to be, but I'm not getting into that now. The comic ends at the soon-to-be reopened Feast Center, where the miracles of the past few months seem to be fading away, and Lee seems to be getting suddenly sick and ill-tempered. Of course, we already know about Lee's dark side, as he was revealed to be Mr. Negative in that villain's first story. But it does seem there might still be more mystery going on here. We also see Brock outside the center, walking off into the dark, his anti-venom symbiote having apparently survived whatever Scorpion injected him with. And on that cliffhanger, we'll drop into the breakdown. Boy, this was a story. There are things I like about it. Say what you will about Dan Slott, and I know there's lots of you haters out there. One thing he is good at is Spider-Man snark, and I always appreciate a writer capable of capturing Spidey's snark. That was a lot of alliteration. I need to stop doing that to myself. I also am kind of fond of anti-venom's introduction. It feels like a completely natural and organic evolution of the character that we've been seeing for what would have been almost 25 years since the symbiote first appeared by this point. I also like that it ties into whatever is going on with Mr. Negative, who is definitely the standout and most interesting villain of all of those to come out of Brand New Day. It's also good to see pre-B&D villains like Venom and Green Goblin come back into the story. And in a lot of ways, this does feel like a story that the series has been building to since the start of Brand New Day. But that's also where it disappoints. For a story that feels like this is where things were leading, it kinda doesn't go anywhere. It's like they were still too afraid to pull the trigger on these story arcs. So we're left with a story that's treated like a big event, but instead feels like just more coy buildup for something cool that might possibly eventually happen maybe. As big of a Spidey fan as I am, and as much leniency as I want to grant to Marvel, I'm definitely losing faith by this point that this is actually going anywhere. And okay, I'll also just never understand how anyone can be a fan of JR Jr.'s art. Like, what's with all these wonky proportions? I mean, what's going on here with Songbird's hand? Is that just her thumb? Her hand must be the size of both of her legs. And why does he insist on drawing just a single thick solid line for women's cheekbones? It looks like you're cutting off their faces. What are you doing? And why is everyone so blocky? Why does everybody look like they're put together from Lincoln Logs that were factory rejected for being too blocky? I'm sorry, I'm not trying to hate on the guy personally. Seriously, nothing against him on a personal level, but man, do I hate his art. So I guess what I'm saying is I give this series a recommendation level of medium. If you're reading through Brand New Day, definitely don't stop before reading this one, and Spidey fans in general could definitely do worse, but man do I wish this story had more teeth to it. The collected edition gets 1. Monogrammed Explosive, which I'm counting as a good thing. What can I say? They're adorable. The collection is 6 issues with a bonus cover gallery, extra bonus covers between each issue, and bits from an issue of Marvel Spotlight collected in the back. That includes interviews with Dan Slott, Romita Jr., and editor Stephen Wacker, as well as some additional bonus art. Like I said, Marvel was really treating this like it was a big event, even if it really kinda wasn't. Thanks everybody for watching. As I said in my last couple of Spidey videos, I just want to keep running through the Brand New Day series one volume or arc at a time, in between all the videos I'm doing otherwise. So this is just a brief interruption before moving on back to Batman in the New 52. So if you enjoyed this and you want to see more, then make sure to click all the YouTube buttons and things so you can help the channel out and help yourself to follow along so you can be sure to be here next time, and I hope to see you then, right here in the Comic Cave.